The school day had finally ended. Students filed out of the building, chatting with friends, laughing, or heading straight for their cars. It was a typical afternoon at the high school. Among the crowd was a quiet student walking alone, his eyes focused on the ground. He had stayed late to finish up a project and was eager to get home. But as he passed the front of the school, something caught his eye. It was Mrs. Reynolds, one of the most well-known teachers at the school. She stood in the parking lot talking to a group of students. Normally, she'd be friendly. She was known for being strict but fair. But today, something was different. Her face looked tense and her hands were crossed tightly over her chest. The student knew Mrs. Reynolds. She taught English, and though she was known for pushing students hard, she had earned respect over the years. But today, something about her attitude felt off. As he made his way to his car, he overheard part of her conversation. Mrs. Reynolds was talking to a couple of students, accusing them of something. The words she used weren't friendly. She seemed frustrated, angry even. He didn't want to get involved, but curiosity kept him listening for just a moment longer. He caught the end of the conversation as Mrs. Reynolds raised her voice. "I know it was you," she snapped. "You think you can get away with this, don't you?" The student knew the person she was talking to. It was one of the quiet kids, a student who usually kept to himself. He had no idea what the accusation was about, but he could hear the tension in the teacher's voice. Then, suddenly, the words came out of Mrs. Reynolds' mouth like a slap in the face. "You're nothing but a thug. I don't know why I even bother with you. You probably don't even know how to spell your own name, do you?" The student's heart stopped. He had heard the words before in places he never expected, on the streets, in movies, but never in this setting. Not from a teacher. Not in front of other students. The quiet student stood still, frozen. The other students around them were too stunned to speak. No one moved. Mrs. Reynolds' harsh words hung in the air, making everything feel heavy. The quiet student, eyes wide with shock, tried to speak, but nothing came out. Instead, he turned and walked away quickly, his head low. The student, who had been watching the whole scene from a distance, couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. He stayed there for a moment, uncertain of what to do. Should he say something? Could he do something? He watched the quiet student leave, walking fast, not looking back. But it was clear that this wasn't just any ordinary argument. It was something deeper, something far more troubling. The words Mrs. Reynolds had used weren't just a harsh insult. They were a reminder of something far worse. The student who had witnessed it all didn't know what to make of it. He wasn't close to the quiet kid, but he could feel the weight of the moment. Something in him told him this wasn't going to end quietly. Something in him told him that the day wasn't over, and neither was the fight. As he got into his car, he took out his phone and recorded a quick video of the teacher standing by herself in the parking lot. Her face was still flushed, her arms crossed tightly. She seemed to be muttering to herself, but the damage was done. He knew he had to show what he had seen. Someone had to know what had just happened. The drive home felt long, even though it was only a few minutes. The student couldn't stop replaying the scene in his head. He wasn't sure what was worse, the words Mrs. Reynolds had used or the look on the quiet student's face as he walked away. It was a look of disbelief, as if he couldn't fully understand what had just happened. By the time he arrived home, his mind was still racing. He quickly uploaded the video to his social media accounts, knowing that it would spread fast. Within minutes, the video was being shared, commented on, and tagged. What had happened wasn't just an argument anymore. It was something that everyone needed to see. The next day, the video was everywhere. Students were talking about it in the halls, whispering in groups. Some defended Mrs. Reynolds, claiming it was just a heated moment. Others, though, were outraged. They couldn't believe what they had witnessed. The video didn't lie. The words spoken were clear. For the quiet student who had been the target of the words, it was a painful reminder of something he had dealt with before. The racism, the prejudice, the feeling of being judged based on things he couldn't control, it was all too familiar. But this time it wasn't just one person. This time everyone could see it. As the day went on, more and more students began to speak out. The atmosphere at the school shifted from confusion to anger. But the question on everyone's mind wasn't just whether Mrs. Reynolds would face consequences. It was whether anything would change. The quiet student, who had been the focus of the incident, was nowhere to be found. Some wondered if he would return to school at all, or if he would choose to leave for good. But for now, no one knew. All they knew was that something had broken that day. And once something was broken, it wasn't always easy to fix. Meanwhile, Mrs. Reynolds kept to herself. She was aware of the video, aware of the growing buzz around it. She had heard the whispers in the teacher's lounge, seen the way people looked at her in the halls, but she hadn't said anything yet. She wasn't sure what to say. As the day drew to a close, a sense of unease settled over the school. It was clear that things were changing. The fallout from the incident hadn't even begun, and no one knew what the next day would bring. But one thing was certain. The tension that had been building for months, maybe even years, had finally come to a head. The silence after the bell rang felt heavier than usual. No one spoke as they walked out of the school. It was as if the weight of the event from earlier had wrapped itself around the entire campus, and no one knew how to shake it off. And so, the day ended. But for those who had witnessed the confrontation, and for the student who had been humiliated, it was far from over. The real story had just begun. The next day at school was different. The hallways, which were usually filled with chatter and the sounds of students rushing between classes, felt quieter than usual. There was a tension in the air, something unspoken but heavy. Everyone knew about the video. Everyone had seen the confrontation between Mrs. Reynolds and the quiet student in the parking lot. And now nothing felt the same. By the time first period had begun, rumors had already spread like wildfire. Phones buzzed with messages, and social media was flooded with comments, reposts, and angry reactions. The video, which had started as a short clip posted by one student, was everywhere now. It was on Twitter, Instagram, and even Facebook, and the reactions were mixed. Some defended the teacher, calling it a momentary lapse of judgment, while others couldn't believe what they had witnessed. The quiet student, who had become the center of the storm, wasn't in school that day. No one knew where he was. Some students whispered that he had transferred to another school. Others wondered if he'd even return at all. The truth was, no one had heard from him, and the silence only added to the tension. The hallways were filled with half-spoken thoughts, confused looks, and unsure steps. Mrs. Reynolds, on the other hand, arrived at school early, just like every other day. She parked her car in the same spot, her face a mask of calm, but the weight of what had happened still hung over her like a dark cloud. She had hoped that maybe, just maybe, the whole thing would blow over, that maybe if she just ignored it, everything would return to normal. But it didn't. As she walked through the teacher's lounge, the usual greetings felt forced. Colleagues who once chatted with her easily now avoided her gaze. She could feel their eyes on her, even though they tried to pretend they weren't looking. Whispers followed her from one end of the hall to the other. The video had gone viral overnight, and now everyone was talking about it. At the same time, the school administration was under pressure. The principal, who had always been supportive of Mrs. Reynolds, seemed distant. The school district was receiving an overwhelming number of calls from angry parents, demanding that something be done. Some parents wanted Mrs. Reynolds fired immediately, while others called for a suspension. The school board had called an emergency meeting that afternoon, and all eyes were on them. But in the middle of all this chaos, no one was focusing on what the quiet student needed. He was the one who had been directly attacked, the one who had faced the humiliation, but he had become a shadow in the storm. The school was caught up in the scandal, but they had forgotten the human side of it, the hurt, the confusion, the trauma that one student had to deal with. At lunch, groups of students huddled in corners, speaking in hushed voices, analyzing every moment of the video. Some were angry at Mrs. Reynolds, while others said that maybe she didn't mean it. She was just frustrated, one student suggested. She didn't really mean it like that. But others weren't so sure. You can't say something like that and just walk away like it's nothing, another student responded. The quiet student's absence was the talk of the day. Some students tried to reach out to him, texting or calling, but there was no response. They were all worried. They hadn't seen him since the incident, and no one knew if he would come back to school at all. His absence only made the situation more uncomfortable, as if something important was left unsaid. Meanwhile, Mrs. Reynolds sat in her classroom staring at the same lesson plans she had written up the night before. But nothing made sense anymore. She had never meant for things to get out of hand like this. She had always prided herself on being a professional. But now, as she stared at her desk, she knew she had crossed a line. She had said things she couldn't take back. Her phone buzzed on the desk, and she picked it up, hoping for something, anything, that would help her make sense of the mess she had created. It was a text from her daughter who had seen the video. Her daughter, a freshman in college, was just as shocked as everyone else. She had been getting calls from friends, classmates, and professors, all asking her about the video. "I can't believe it, Mom," the message read. "Everyone's talking about you. I don't know what to say." Mrs. Reynolds felt a lump form in her throat. She had worked so hard to build a career, to be seen as fair and respected, and now it felt like it was all falling apart. She couldn't help but think about her family. What would her husband say? What would her colleagues think of her now? Before she could respond, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from the school principal. "Mrs. Reynolds, we need to talk," the principal said in a tone that made her stomach drop. "The board is meeting this afternoon and I need you to come in for a discussion." She nodded, though he couldn't see her. "I understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The call ended, and she sat there for a moment staring at her phone. It was as if the weight of everything had finally hit her all at once. She had no idea what was coming, but she knew it wasn't going to be good. She had hurt someone, and now she was going to have to face the consequences. The rest of the day felt like a blur. Mrs. Reynolds went through the motions of teaching, but her heart wasn't in it. Every time she looked at her students, she couldn't help but wonder what they thought of her now. They had seen her as a strict but fair teacher, someone who knew how to push them to do their best. But now, how could they look at her the same way? Meanwhile, the quiet student's absence was weighing heavily on everyone. The rumors about him began to spread, and some students wondered if he would return to school at all. They had no way of knowing what he was going through or how he was handling it, but they all knew one thing: the school had failed him. It wasn't just Mrs. Reynolds who needed to face consequences. It was the entire system that had allowed this to happen in the first place. By the time the school bell rang, Mrs. Reynolds was exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained. She didn't know what the future held for her. Would she be fired? Would the school ever be the same again, and what about the quiet student? How was he feeling? That night, the school's administration sent out a statement. The investigation was starting. They promised that they would handle the situation with care and that the community would be kept informed. But for Mrs. Reynolds, that wasn't enough. She knew that the damage had already been done. She knew she had to face the truth of what she had said, and no statement could change that. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what tomorrow would bring. And for the quiet student, who had been the focus of the whole ordeal, she could only hope that he would be okay. She had no idea how to make things right. All she could do was wait for the fallout and hope that somehow there would be a way to fix what she had broken. The morning after the video went viral, things at school felt different. The halls were quieter, but not in a peaceful way. There was a heavy, nervous energy in the air. Everyone knew something was coming, something big. It felt like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. By first period, the principal's office was already buzzing with activity. Word had gotten out that there would be a special meeting with the school board later that afternoon. Teachers were whispering, students were chatting in hushed tones, and no one seemed to know what was going to happen next. The quiet student still hadn't shown up at school. No one had heard from him. His absence was felt deeply, like a missing piece of a puzzle. His friends were worried, unsure if he would ever return. They kept checking their phones, hoping for a text or some kind of message. But as the day wore on, it became clear that the silence surrounding him wasn't going to break easily. Mrs. Reynolds, for her part, was still in shock. She had tried to keep a brave face, but every step she took felt heavier than the last. The reactions to the video were impossible to escape. In every corner, on every screen, people were talking about what had happened. Some defended her, claiming that it was just a mistake, an unfortunate outburst. Others, though, weren't so kind. They called for her to be fired, to face severe consequences. There were rumors of protests outside the school, and even some calls for her to be banned from teaching altogether. It wasn't just the students. The teachers were starting to pull away from her. Mrs. Reynolds had always been known as someone who could take charge of a classroom, someone who commanded respect. But now, she could feel the walls closing in. The friendly smiles in the teacher's lounge were gone. Her colleagues avoided. Her eyes and the conversations around her became quieter, more distant. It was as if she had become a ghost in her own school. The pressure of the situation was getting to her. Every time she walked past a classroom, she could feel the stares. She knew the whispers were there, even if they weren't always loud enough to hear. She couldn't remember a time when she had felt so alone. That afternoon, the phone call came. It was the principal again, and the calm tone in his voice didn't ease her nerves. "Mrs. Reynolds, the board wants to speak with you. I'll be in the meeting, but you need to come to the district office now." Her heart dropped. She knew what that meant. The school board was meeting to discuss the incident. The investigation had already begun, and they wanted her side of the story. She grabbed her coat, forcing her hands to stop shaking, and walked out of the classroom without a word to anyone. As she drove to the district office, her mind raced. She didn't know what to expect. Was she going to be fired? Would she lose everything? Her career, her reputation, her standing in the community? It all felt like it was hanging by a thread. She had worked so hard to get where she was, and now it all seemed to be unraveling. When she arrived, she was escorted into a conference room where several members of the school board were already seated. The principal was there, as well as a couple of other administrators. Mrs. Reynolds sat at the end of the long table, feeling the weight of their gazes. The silence in the room was thick, and she couldn't bring herself to break it. The board president was the first to speak. He looked at her with a stern expression, though there was no anger in his voice, only disappointment. "Mrs. Reynolds," he began, "we're here today to discuss the incident that took place yesterday. As you know, this situation has caused significant disruption at the school. We've received complaints from both parents and students. The video has gone viral, and it's clear that this matter has gone beyond just a classroom disagreement." Mrs. Reynolds nodded, though her throat felt tight. She had no idea what to say. She wasn't sure she could even find the right words to explain what had happened. It was hard to explain something that felt so wrong, something she had never imagined she would do. "I want to be clear," the board president continued, "that we take these kinds of matters very seriously. Racism, in any form, is not something we can tolerate in our schools. It goes against everything we stand for. You've been a respected member of our teaching staff for many years, but right now we're questioning how this could have happened under your watch." The principal spoke next, his voice soft but firm. "We've had no reports of any similar incidents in the past, and I know you've always been known for maintaining discipline in your classroom. But this is different. This is beyond just classroom management. This is a serious issue." The words stung. Mrs. Reynolds couldn't argue with them. She had no excuse. She had crossed a line, and there was no taking back the words she had said. She could feel the heat rise in her face, a mix of guilt and shame. She had always prided herself on being fair. She had always believed that she treated her students with respect, but now she wasn't so sure. The room felt like it was closing in on her. She struggled to keep her composure, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She had always been confident, always in control. But now she was unsure of herself in ways she never thought possible. "I understand," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have an excuse for what happened. I know what I said was wrong. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. All I can do is tell you that it was a mistake, a horrible, unforgivable mistake. I've never felt so ashamed of myself in my entire life." The board members exchanged glances, but no one spoke. Mrs. Reynolds wasn't sure what they were thinking, but the silence felt unbearable. "I've been teaching for over 20 years, she continued, her voice steadier now. "I've seen students from all walks of life, and I've always tried to treat them equally. I never thought I was capable of saying something like that. But that doesn't excuse it. It was wrong, and I'm sorry, I truly am." One of the board members spoke up. "Do you understand the gravity of what you said? Do you understand how it affected the student?" Mrs. Reynolds nodded again. "I know. I've been thinking about it nonstop. I've tried to reach out to him, but I haven't heard anything. I don't know where he is, but I know I hurt him. I can only hope that somehow he can forgive me." The board remained silent for a moment. the weight of the situation sinking in. Finally, the president spoke again. "We're going to take this matter under advisement. We will have to suspend you while the investigation continues, and we will make a decision soon about the next steps. This is a serious matter, and we need to ensure that it's handled correctly." Mrs. Reynolds felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. A suspension? She had known it was coming, but hearing it aloud made everything feel more real. She wasn't sure if that would be enough to fix things, or if there was any way to fix what she had done. The meeting ended with no clear answers, only more questions. Mrs. Reynolds left the district office in a daze, not sure what the next step would be. The only thing she could focus on was the quiet student. She wondered where he was, what he was feeling, and if he would ever be able to forgive her. As she drove home that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. She had hurt someone, and no matter what happened next, the consequences would be far-reaching. But she also knew that the quiet student, who had been the real victim in all of this, was still out there somewhere. She could only hope that somehow, he would find peace in the midst of all the chaos. And maybe, just maybe, they could both find a way to heal. The days following the meeting with the school board were a blur for Mrs. Reynolds. She spent most of her time at home, pacing around her house trying to figure out what to do next. The suspension had been difficult to accept, but she understood it. She knew she needed time to reflect, and the school needed time to process everything that had happened. But as the days dragged on, the reality of the situation began to weigh heavier on her. The video was still everywhere, and the incident was still the main topic of conversation. At school, life went on without her. Students continued to walk the hallways, attend classes, and gossip about what had happened, but something had changed. The school no longer felt like the place it used to be. Teachers were walking around with a sense of uncertainty, and the students were divided. Some felt sorry for Mrs. Reynolds, believing it was just a moment of frustration that got out of hand. Others felt betrayed by her, unable to forgive the words she had said. The quiet student's absence still haunted the halls. His friends were still looking for him, still hoping that he would come back to school, but there were no signs of him. No one knew where he had gone, and it was unclear whether he was planning to return. The rumors about him were rampant, and some said he had transferred to another school. Others said he was just too embarrassed to face anyone. Meanwhile, the school board was still investigating the incident. The administration was in constant communication with the district, and it seemed like every decision they made was under a microscope. Everyone was waiting for the final verdict on what would happen next. Mrs. Reynolds tried to stay busy. She spent her days reading, trying to distract herself from the chaos. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had failed. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the quiet student's face, the shock and hurt in his eyes as he walked away. She couldn't stop thinking about how she had let him down, and she couldn't figure out how to fix it. On the third day of her suspension, Mrs. Reynolds received an unexpected phone call. It was from the quiet student's mother. She had been nervous to answer, unsure of what to expect, but when she heard the mother's voice, she was surprised by how calm she sounded. "Hello, Mrs. Reynolds?" the voice on the other end said. "I know this may be a difficult call, but I wanted to speak with you." Mrs. Reynolds sat up straight, her heart racing. "Of course," she said. I've been trying to reach your son. I want to apologize for what happened. I'm so sorry for what I said." There was a pause before the mother spoke again. "I know you're sorry, Mrs. Reynolds. I know you didn't mean for it to go the way it did. But the truth is, my son has been struggling. He's been hurt, and it's not just because of what you said. It's because of everything that led up to it. The things people have said to him, the way he's been treated. This was just the final straw." The words hit Mrs. Reynolds like a punch to the stomach. She had known that the quiet student had been affected by the incident, but hearing it from his mother was something else entirely. She had underestimated how deeply her words had cut him, how much pain he had been carrying for so long. I didn't realize," Mrs. Reynolds whispered, feeling the weight of her own ignorance. "I never meant to hurt him that way. I never saw what he was going through. I lost control." The mother's voice softened. "I know you didn't mean it, but my son has had to face so much already. People like him, they don't get a chance to speak up. They don't get a chance to defend themselves. They get pushed to the side, ignored. And when someone like you, Someone who is supposed to protect them says something like that. It's a reminder of everything they've been made to feel. Mrs. Reynolds felt a lump form in her throat. The realization hit her hard. She had seen herself as a teacher, someone in a position of authority, someone who could shape young minds. But she had failed to see the bigger picture. She had failed to recognize the pain that some of her students carried with them every day. "I understand now," she said quietly. "I never should have said those words. I never should have made him feel that way." The mother was silent for a moment, and then she spoke again. "I don't know what happens next, Mrs. Reynolds, but I want you to know that my son needs time. He needs space, and I hope that one day when he's ready, he can come back to school. But it's going to take a long time for him to heal from this." "I understand," Mrs. Reynolds replied, her voice breaking. "I just want him to know how sorry I am. I never meant to hurt him." The conversation ended soon after, and Mrs. Reynolds sat in her living room, staring at the phone in her hand. The weight of the conversation settled in her chest. She had so many regrets, so many things she wished she had done differently, but there was no turning back now. All she could do was wait. Wait for the quiet student to heal, wait for the investigation to finish, wait for the school to decide what would happen to her. But as the days passed, she couldn't stop thinking about the quiet student. She kept wondering where he was, what he was doing, and how he was feeling. She knew that no matter what happened, the scars from this incident would stay with him for a long time, and that thought weighed heavily on her heart. Back at school, the investigation was moving forward, but no one had any clear answers. The board had yet to make a decision, and the principal had not been forthcoming with any updates. The students, meanwhile, were still split. Some of them felt that Mrs. Reynolds had made a mistake, but didn't deserve to lose her job over it. Others were still angry, unable to forgive what she had said. As the days turned into weeks, the quiet student's absence became more and more apparent. His friends were still asking around, still hoping for some sign that he would return, but there was nothing. Some of them had tried to visit his home, but no one answered the door. The silence surrounding him was almost as loud as the words that had been spoken. It was clear that whatever had happened, it had deeply affected him. But no one knew just how deep the wound went. The situation at school continued to simmer, and it felt like the air was thick with tension. Every day, students whispered in the halls, and teachers exchanged worried looks. Everyone was waiting for something to break. Either the decision from the school board, or for the quiet student to finally come back and face the world again. But for now, everything was at a standstill. Mrs. Reynolds, still suspended, was doing everything she could to reflect on her actions and make sense of the pain she had caused. The days were long, and the uncertainty of what would come next was like a cloud that hung over everything. In the end, all she could do was wait. Wait for forgiveness, wait for healing, and wait for the quiet student to find his voice again. She had lost hers, but she was determined to find it once more, if only she could find a way to make things right. The days dragged on, and Mrs. Reynolds found herself stuck in a world of uncertainty. Every time she woke up, the same questions haunted her thoughts. What would happen when the school board made its decision? Would she lose her job? Would the quiet student ever return? There were moments when she could almost forget about everything. Moments when the world seemed normal again. She would sit with a book in her lap, her thoughts drifting to other things, but then the weight of it all would come crashing back. The news was still buzzing with the viral video, and it felt like everyone had an opinion on what she had done. Some blamed her for what had happened, others tried to defend her, but it didn't matter. The damage had been done, and now there was no going back. But the phone call from the quiet student's mother kept replaying in her mind. It had been a turning point. A moment where the true consequences of her actions had become clear. She realized that the quiet student wasn't just another name in her classroom, another face she had to manage. He was a person, a young person who had been dealing with more than she could have known. She had taken his pain, his silence, and in that moment of frustration, she had amplified it. Mrs. Reynolds knew she had to make things right, but how? How could she ever fix something so broken? She couldn't change what had happened, and she couldn't take back the words she had said, but she had to try. For the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe it wasn't too late. Meanwhile, at school, things were continuing as usual, though it was hard to ignore the tension that lingered. Teachers were still walking around with heavy hearts, unsure of what to say or how to act. They had all been affected by what had happened, even if they didn't know how to talk about it. No one wanted to speak out of turn. No one wanted to make things worse. The students, too, were restless. There was an undercurrent of division. Some students were angry, others were still confused, and a few just didn't know what to think. But through all of it, the absence of the quiet student was felt most acutely. It was as if his absence had left a hole in the school, one that no one could fill. His friends still held on to hope, checking in with one another and asking if anyone had heard from him. But the silence remained. Then one morning, just as Mrs. Reynolds was beginning to think she had been forgotten by the world, a message arrived. It was from the quiet student's mother, asking if she would be willing to meet with her son. Mrs. Reynolds' heart skipped a beat. The message was clear. He wanted to speak with her. The thought of meeting him filled her with both excitement and dread. She wasn't sure what he would say, or if he would even want to listen to her apology. But she knew that this was the moment she had been waiting for. This was her chance to make things right. They agreed to meet at a local park. The meeting would be simple. No cameras, no crowds, just the two of them. When the day finally came, Mrs. Reynolds arrived early, her nerves making her hands tremble as she gripped the steering wheel. She had no idea what to expect, but she was ready to face whatever came her way. As she walked to the park bench, she saw the quiet student sitting there, his face down, his posture slumped. He looked smaller than she remembered, as if the weight of everything that had happened was pressing down on him. For a moment she almost turned away. It was too much. But then he looked up and saw her standing there. His face was neutral, his eyes tired, but there was something else too, a flicker of something. Maybe curiosity, maybe hope. "Hi," she said softly, unsure of what else to say. He nodded but didn't speak. There was a long silence between them before Mrs. Reynolds gathered the courage to speak again. "I'm so sorry for what I said," she started, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't even know how to begin to explain how wrong it was. But I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I was wrong and I'm sorry." He still didn't say anything. Mrs. Reynolds could see the wall he had put up. She knew it wasn't going to be easy, but she wasn't about to give up. She had to keep going. "I've been thinking about what happened every single day," she continued. "I know that I hurt you and I can never take that back, but I want you to know that I'm trying to be better. I want to be better for you and for everyone else. I don't want you to feel like you don't matter." The quiet student finally spoke, his voice soft but clear. "It's not just you, he said. "It's not just what you said. It's everything. It's how people treat me. It's how I've always been treated." Mrs. Reynolds felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She had never fully understood what he had been going through, what he had been feeling. She had assumed that because she treated all her students equally, it meant she was doing enough. But that wasn't enough. It never had been. "I can't change everything," she said, "but I can try. I can try to be better, to listen better. I want you to know that you matter. You are important." The quiet student was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the ground. Then slowly he lifted his head and looked at her. "I'm not sure if I can forgive you," he said quietly. "But I'm not angry anymore." Mrs. Reynolds' heart swelled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. She knew that forgiveness would take time, that it couldn't happen in one meeting. But hearing him say those words, hearing that he wasn't angry anymore, felt like the first step toward healing. "I understand," she said softly. "And I don't expect forgiveness right away. But I want you to know that I'm here. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here." For a long while they sat there in silence, the weight of everything that had happened settling between them. Mrs. Reynolds didn't try to fill the silence with words. She knew that sometimes silence spoke louder than anything else. Finally, the quiet student stood up and Mrs. Reynolds followed suit. He didn't say much, but as he turned to leave, he paused. "I'll think about what you said," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be waiting," Mrs. Reynolds replied. As he walked away, Mrs. Reynolds felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in weeks. There was still a long way to go, and she knew that things wouldn't magically get better overnight. But in that moment, she felt like a small weight had been lifted.
She had taken the first step toward making things right.
And that was enough for now. The meeting with the quiet student marked the beginning of a new chapter for Mrs. Reynolds. It didn't erase what had happened, but it allowed her to move forward. She spent the next few months continuing to reflect on her actions, learning, and trying to be a better educator, one who truly saw her students for who they were and not just who they appeared to be. As for the quiet student, he eventually returned to school. It wasn't an easy return, but it was a start. His journey was just beginning, and Mrs. Reynolds knew that it would take time for him to heal fully. But she also knew that they were both learning and growing, and that was the most important thing of all. In the end, the incident had changed everything. It had forced both of them to confront the harsh realities of the world they lived in, but it had also opened the door to healing, forgiveness, and understanding, and that in itself was a step toward a better future.